This video is all about asking someone how they're doing and introducing someone to somebody else. So let's go ahead and start with asking how someone is doing. We've got three main ways that you can do that. The first two are the more familiar, less formal, kind of everyday, if you see a friend of yours kind of way. And those are actually the ones that we've introduced a little bit in class. The first one being "Comment ça va?", which you'll notice is very similar to the one that we did in class. It just adds "como" to the beginning. "Como" is literally the word for how. So instead of just saying "it's going," which is what we learned in class, and that's what the second one is, we'll get to that in a second, you're literally saying "how's it going?" So the first one again was "Comment ça va?". The second one then, same one we talked about in class, "Ça va?". And then if you're talking to somebody, we talked a little bit about that formal kind of speech, maybe a boss, a teacher, basically any adult you're not related to or somebody you're not real familiar with, you will use the very formal way of asking, how is it going or how are you doing? And that is "Comment allez-vous?". Now you'll notice that "et toi" and "et vous" are on here. They're two separate phrases. Now I know we wrote them on the same line. They both mean the same thing. They both mean "and you." As in, if somebody else asks you "Comment ça va?" and you say "Ça va," you might go ahead and ask them "et toi?" and then you're asking them "and you." As in, what about you? What you just asked me, right back at you. Now, "et toi," the first phrase, does mean "and you," but it means "and you" for somebody that's your own age, somebody you're kind of familiar with. "Et vous" gets used whenever you're talking to, again, that kind of formal speech, an adult that you're not related to, maybe a teacher, things along those lines. So those are the ways that you can ask how you are doing. Let's go ahead and talk about some responses. If you're having a good day, here are some things you can say. You can try "bien," which means that you're doing well. You can try "très bien," which means you're doing very well. Or you can do the whole sentence "ça va bien," which literally means it's going well. Pretty basic stuff. If your day is just okay, you can use that phrase that we've already talked about earlier in class, which is by just saying "ça va," which is it's going, I'm fine. If you'd like to be extra special polite, you can add a "merci" to that. So you end up with "ça va, merci," which is basically saying fine, thanks. If your day's not bad, you could say "pas mal." You can also use "plus ou moins," which literally means more or less, but they put it as so-so because if somebody says, "Hey, is it going okay for you?" More or less. But nobody in English really answers "how are you doing?" with more or less. So again, "plus ou moins" pretty much means so-so. The last thing is, of course, if you're having a bad day, notice that they only give you one way of talking about this, and it actually uses the word "pas" in front of the phrase "très bien." So if you kind of look at your translation of "pas mal" and you combine that with your translation of "très bien," you get all together "pas très bien," which means not very well. Let's go ahead and move on to introducing someone. If you wanted to introduce a friend or a family member or anything like that, here are some ways of doing that. First of all, if you do introduce somebody by saying the second line here, "ça c'est," you're literally saying "this is." So you could fill in the person's name. So if I were to introduce my husband to you, I would say "ça c'est Monsieur Dinwiddie." Now, you sometimes want to, sorry for the interruptions. I guess it's kind of clear that I filmed these or recorded these at school this time. If you have just introduced somebody, a lot of times you want to kind of explain who that person is. So one of the most popular people that you may end up introducing in your life are your friends. So that's why they give you this first sentence here. They want you to be able to explain who the person is by saying something like "c'est un ami" or "c'est une amie." Now the difference between "un ami" and "une amie" is whether it's a friend who is a boy or if it's a friend who is a girl. So be careful. If you want to say he's a friend, it's "c'est un ami." If you want to say she's a friend, you'll say "c'est une amie." Another way is to literally say "I present to you." They translate it on your notes here as "I'd like to introduce you to," but just again, it's the same as "ça c'est." Instead of saying "this is," you're literally saying "I present to you" or "I'd like to introduce you to," and you have to follow it up with the person's name. So again, if I was introducing you to Mr. Dinwiddie, "Je te présente Monsieur Dinwiddie." But if I was introducing him to somebody I needed to speak more formally with, again, we're talking about that tu versus vous form. If I were to introduce Mr. Dinwiddie to Dr. Kelly, my boss, I would say, je vous présente Mr. Dinwiddie. Finally, you don't want to be caught just standing there looking silly whenever somebody introduces you to somebody else. So these are some responses that you can have. If somebody says, hey, this is Mr. Dinwiddie, I would expect you to respond either by just saying salut, which is, of course, hi. It's a pretty regular way to respond to somebody introducing you. The more fancy schmancy way, though, is to say enchanté. Enchanté literally means enchanted. It's kind of like saying delighted or nice to meet you. The reason why there's an extra E here in parentheses is if you are a girl who is delighted, then you need to add an extra E when you write it. I know this is really strange. We'll get into some discussions this year about masculine versus feminine. And in this case, if you're a boy who is delighted, so if you're a boy listening to this and I were to say to you, je te présente Monsieur Dinwiddie, you would say enchanté, no extra E. If you were a girl and I was introducing you to my husband, I would say je te présente Monsieur Dinwiddie, and you would say enchanté, and you would go ahead and add that extra E. You don't hear the difference, you only see it when you write it. Last thing we need to talk about is, of course, the practice question. You'll see a couple things like this when you come to class next class. If I ask you, comment ça va, you should be able to respond. Now, any of those responses would be okay, whether you're having a good day, an okay day, or a bad day. I happen to be having a good day, except for all those announcements coming in. So I went ahead and